Kind words.
You got to ask her. It was. What did you first think? Say it.
First time I saw my husband, I thought, okay, let me set the scene.
No, don't set the scene.
Okay, it's the 80s. Scott's doing when we were in college. And I didn't know him. I just saw him performing. He was doing Angus Young. So if anybody
I did a really good job of it.
if anybody knows
Yeah,
ACDC,
I did it all.
and I saw him performing, and I thought, if anybody can do that, it's gonna be great.
You thought to yourself, I will never marry that man. And then you were doomed. From that point.
God has a sense of humor.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Rob.
I was gonna say, the first time I seen Michelle was in junior high. And our first date was 20 years later.
So junior high, you were probably thinking,
Where's another girl?
this, yeah, this she is. What are girls? Anyone else? First time you saw your spouse, Cresta?
Well, Zach's sister set us up. It was a blind date, and she brought in a picture of his like high school years, and she's like, he looks pretty much the same as his hair. So I was like, ah, yeah, like how much did he lose?
Yeah.
So my very first thought when I opened the door was, she wasn't good.
Apparently a lot. You were right.
From that picture.
Oh, and stress of college. Just blow you right up. Anyone else?
First time I saw Alicia was, let me set the scene, okay? Let me set the scene. I was sitting in the parking lot as a junior in high school in my 1998 Mustang. That wasn't a GT, but so it was just a six-cylinder that I thought, you know, I want to put dual exhaust and glass packs on this thing, and so it sounded it was terrible, but it was loud, okay? And I thought I was so cool. And I was sitting there, and Alicia comes walking out of volleyball practice with one of my friends. And she was new, and so I was like, okay, new volleyball girl, whatever. And so my friend comes up and talks to me. Alicia says, hey, nice car. And I was like, you know, I know, obviously. So that was the first time that I saw Alicia. I didn't really think anything of it. The next day was the first day of school, and so that was our first actual interaction. And we were in study hall together, and she was sitting at a table all by herself. New kid in school, doesn't know anyone, and she, you know, wasn't talking to anyone, just by herself over in the corner. And me, being the guy that I am, came over to her table and told her that she needed to sit at a different table because me and my friends are going to play cards here at this table. And so she probably, very rude, very rude. So she probably thought, you know, what a jerk, which would not be wrong. But then, so it wasn't love at first sight, it was love at third sight, okay? And that's a thing. That's a thing we can all agree on. Because the third time I saw her that was a Wednesday. The first day of school was a Wednesday. And then later that night, I went to Bible class at church, and Alicia was her dad was our new preacher. Didn't know that we were even looking for a new preacher. You know, teenagers, we have no brains attached in our skulls. But we got this new preacher, and Alicia was the preacher's daughter, and I walked into the church building, and she was sitting in the secretary's office, and it was a literal double take. Like I walked by and I was like, hey, and I was like, whoop. Let's back that up a second. Hey! And that night, I let Alicia borrow my Bible, and I made fun of her for being the preacher's daughter that didn't have her Bible at Bible study. And from that moment on, it was just, we were together. And I remember, I don't know if she remembers this. I remember early on in our relationship, before we were official, right? We were sending letters to each other, wrapped in little paper footballs. That we were sending letters to each other between classes, and at the end of them, I always said, love ya, like Y-A, love ya, right? Like kind of nonchalant, not super committed. It's just Y-A, right? And in my head, I had convinced myself that, well, as long as I don't say love you, right, Y-O-U, then it's not as serious. It's just a kind of, just like I would say that to anyone, love ya. Until in our relationship, after we became official, like we actually had the conversation, we defined the relationship. We are now boyfriend and girlfriend. That then I ended those letters with love you, Y-O-U. And it was like, looking back on that now, I'm like, that is so dumb. But in my head, it was like that was a switch that was flipped that said, now, there's something more to this. And as a 16-year-old boy, I thought I was deeply mature for my age. Just had wisdom beyond my years. And so when I said, I love you, I thought in my head, I know what this means. And I mean it. But honestly, at 16 years old, newsflash, shocker, I didn't know much about love. Just didn't. But nowadays, when we say those words, I think there's a lot more weight than when we said it as 16-year-olds, which is, again, obvious, right? And I would hope, and I would imagine, the same could be said for your relationship, even if you've only been married for a year, right? When you said those vows, a year later, you're like, oh, okay, this is real. Like, this is serious. Or when you say, I love you, the longer the relationship goes, the deeper and more feeling those words have attached to it. It's just the way things are supposed to go. And so our fourth commitment is this. We will commit to building a relationship of love. Probably, maybe one of the most obvious commitments that you need to make in a marriage if you want it to last is being committed to building a relationship of love, right? 1 Corinthians chapter 13, this is the love chapter. And I just want to refresh our minds here of what Paul is talking about when he gives us a very detailed and lengthy definition of what love is, at least for him. And of course, he's talking about the church here, but love can this passage very easily can be put into the marriage relationship, and that's why it's read at so many weddings. But it says this, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things, and love never ends. All right, many of us are very familiar with those words and this passage, and perhaps this was read at your wedding. But as I said, the idea, the thought is that your love should grow as your relationship matures. Your love, it should have a deeper meaning, a deeper feeling to it. But I want to say something that might shock you, and it's this, that there are more loveless marriages out there than you might think. Love, as you can imagine, is a very vital part of a thriving marriage, but when it comes to love, we have two problems. Number one, there are many things that we call love that simply do not rise to the level of what love is. We call it love, but it's not really love. And number two is we lack a clear definition of what love is and what love does. We're going to spend this class time looking at that first problem, and next week we'll address the second one. There are many things that we call love that simply do not rise to the level of what love is. Many couples believe that it is love that keeps them together, but when you take a hard look at their life, signs point to the fact that they are actually living in a love drought. Let me explain that. 6 years ago, I was teaching Angelina and Ava how to do a front squat. And if you don't know what a front squat is, it's when you hold the weight on a bar, no exception here. I mean, just look around, right? Look around this room. Does anybody look like you? No. Right? Even family members, you're like, no, we're not the same. We're different. We are different from each other, and through marriage, God brings people together who are very different to live in intimate relationships. So then, what is unity in this chaos of difference? Unity results when love and difference intersect. When love and difference intersect, that's when you have to strive for unity. Unity is when you see how different your spouse is from you and choose to better understand them. Unity means that you will be patient through this process. Unity means not wanting your own way all the time. Unity means celebrating who God has made the other person to be. And love turns difference into an opportunity to experience a deeper and fuller unity. Love listens, it works, and it waits. If you want a marker for whether or not true and active love is present in your relationship, how unified are you? Next one is misunderstanding. So much has been said about the differences between men and women. Right? If you've ever been to a marriage class or a seminar, this is talked about. The fact that men and women are different. And I mean, that's just, it's noted, and we realize that in our minds. And you would think with all this information, we wouldn't have as many misunderstandings in our marriages because we realize we're different. But we do, right? We continue to have misunderstandings in our marriages. How well do you think you know your spouse? If you were to scale that understanding from 1 to 10, 1 being you're strangers passing on the street, 10 means that you know everything. Where would you scale your understanding of your spouse?
You don't have to say that out loud. Think about it. Whatever number you picked, I would imagine
With them being your spouse, you're closer towards the 10 and not the 1, hopefully. Next question is, did that understanding happen by accident? Or did you have to work for it? Did you have to put forward effort to gain that level of understanding? It's love the love that Paul is talking about here in 1 Corinthians 13, that gives you the patience to gain that understanding. He flat out says it. Love is patient. In order to get a certain level of understanding, you have to be patient with the other person. Love values the words of the other person. Love celebrates the process of understanding as much as the result. Love prizes and honors the other person that God has designed to journey with you. If there is constant misunderstandings going on in your marriage, it might be a marker of a lack of love. Next, separation. Let me ask you a question. And I do want an answer on this one. Does lack of conflict equal a good marriage? Lack of conflict equals good marriage. Is that true? Y'all are shaking your head. I would agree, right? Can conflict be in a good marriage? Yeah, absolutely. If separation is the issue in your marriage, it might be marked by avoiding conflict at all costs. Right? And you can see how this might be a marker for a lack of love. On the surface, it seems good, right? We never argue about anything, so we must have a good marriage. But those two things do not equal each other. Avoiding conflict at all costs can actually be quite detrimental to any relationship, especially marriage. Rod?
I was gonna say, I used to work with some guys back when the Navy there, that they, at the end of the shift, they all wanted to go to the bar instead of going home. I could never understand that. They'd rather go to the bar and not go home.
Than be with their family? Yeah. I wonder why that is. It's separation, right? Like, well, if me and my wife don't see each other, then we can't fight, right? Yeah, doesn't work that way. What separation is peacefully avoidant cohabitation. Peacefully avoidant cohabitation, which does not equal good, healthy marriage. Love understands that cohabitation is a location, not the relational goal. Love thrives when the call is to build the relationship even stronger, even if that means being uncomfortable. Even if that means having a difficult conversation where you know there's a high likelihood that this ends in a fight because you value the marriage. Another marker, physical dysfunction. Love sees sex as an act and celebration of the self-sacrificing love that marriage is all about. And this physical dysfunction, whether it can be twisted in both directions. One in which there's no physical relationship, right? There's no sex happening in your relationship, and we need to realize that we are sexual beings and God created us that way. And withholding sex from your spouse, not only is it cruel, but it's also goes against what Paul talks about earlier on in this same book of 1 Corinthians, where Paul explicitly says that. Do not withhold your conjugal rights from your spouse. And if you are going to do it, then both people have to be in agreement and only do it for a short amount of time. Why does Paul go into such detail for this? Because he realizes this is part of a healthy and sustaining marriage. But the other way that this can be twisted is having a physical relationship, but using it in a wrong way. That there might not be any true connection while you and your spouse do the act, or just using the avenue of sex to satisfy your lusts. And there's no connection there. And so you can see how physical dysfunction can be twisted in both directions. Conflict is another. When you love someone, you are pained when the things separate and divide you. When you love someone, real, lasting peace is more valuable to you than being right or being in control. If conflict between you and your spouse does not cause you some grief, what is being exposed here is a hardened heart and a failure to love. And when you look at these, when you start trying to find these, when you commit to examine the quality of love in your marriage, you need to be aware of something else as well. Margaret, what are you going to say?
Well, would you say that conflict is inevitable for marriage?
Absolutely.
But it has to be a healthy conflict where you work it out and you talk to one another and you discuss your differences.
Absolutely. If you couldn't hear Margaret, she said conflict in a marriage is unavoidable, right? And I agree with that. I think the marker for a lack of love, though, would be the aftermath of when conflict happens. Does it hurt you? Like to be in conflict with your spouse? Does it grieve you? Does it move you towards reconciliation? Because I know couples where they have conflict and what it does, because their hearts have been hardened, that it only widens the gap between them. And they are resolved to prove their point and to win the argument rather than to be brought back together with their spouse. And I think if that is the case, then that's a marker for a lack of love. One thing we need to be aware of while we are examining the quality of love in our marriages is counterfeit love. Counterfeit love are things that go around and masquerade as if they are love, but they are not. It wears very convincing masks, and the first one is physical attraction. Do not get me wrong. You should be physically attracted to a person that you are committing to be with for the rest of your life. Physical attraction is something that God gives us. Things look good to us. That's for a reason. And physical attraction is most likely a very large part of why you married who you did. But what's the problem with physical attractiveness?
Casey? Vain. Rob?
Falls apart over years.
Falls apart. Aaron?
It fades, and also as you start to maybe see their true character come out, that physical attractiveness does go down.
Yeah. One of the big problems with physical attractiveness is the nature of humanity. We grow old. We grow warts. We gain weight. There are marriages out there that are completely based on physical attraction. And they don't last. How do I know that? Because we don't last. We wear out. We wear down. We grow old. They don't last unless they change
And mature. But if the only reason why you married your spouse is physical attraction and it never grows beyond that, it won't last. This is one of the big counterfeit loves that is a part of our society today. That people would look on the surface, and I'm sure you've known people that, like, man, this is a beautiful couple. Like, they're going to have gorgeous children. Like, these are like two supermodels married to each other. Like, how did that work out? But in my experience, the times where I see that, There's a lot of difficulties along the way. And physical attraction is not everything, but we can pretend like it is. Another counterfeit love is emotional connection. Do you need to be emotionally connected to your spouse to have a healthy marriage? Yeah. The correct answer is yes. Yes. You should be emotionally connected to your spouse. If you're not, there's your homework for the week. Talk about your feelings. Absolutely, it is needed for a healthy marriage. And for those of you who emotionally connect to your spouse on a really deep level, you know just how amazing it is to be able to be connected in that way. Conversations can just flow so easily. It doesn't seem like it's a chore. It's mutually satisfying to be around each other. It's like iron sharpening iron, right? It's like both people are getting better, and if that is the goal in their minds of, like I want to get to know you, I want to be connected, and on every single level, it is so satisfying. But what happens if that's all that there is? It's just emotional connection. And it's hard for us to imagine that, right? Of like, does that actually happen? But it does. Perhaps you are attracted to someone simply because they are easy to be with. And when the veil is pulled back on this counterfeit love, it's not love that you find, but self-love. You love them only because you love yourself first. And they let you do and be how you want to be. Or another way to see this twisted emotional connection is control. And the easiest way for me to explain control and emotional connection is through the eyes of a narcissist. And I know, narcissism, it's a buzzword nowadays, but it's true and present. I've counseled many narcissists. None of them last very long in counseling because the nature of narcissism does not like to be questioned or challenged. And so they know that they need to change, but then when it comes time to change, it's like, but I don't want to do that. It's like, well, then things aren't going to change. Narcissists won't last long in relationships. That's a big sign of narcissism, is that they don't last long in relationships because all they care about is power and control. And as you can imagine, that does not mesh well with a long-term relationship. If all they care about is power and control, because at some point the person will go, stop controlling me, right? And for the narcissist, that's, all right, you're out the door then. If I can't be in control, then the relationship isn't worth it. So what does the narcissist try to find? They try to find someone that they can control above all other things. And sometimes physical attraction becomes secondary for the narcissist over them being able to control someone. And that's the twisted version of emotional connection, where someone can feel like, man, we're just so emotionally connected, where they don't realize that really their relationship is just a controller and someone who is being controlled. It can do a lot of damage, and the narcissist just gets all of that affirmation from them and feelings of being in, of having power and control over whatever they want. The third counterfeit love might shock some of you. So prepare yourselves for this next slide. You're not ready. You're not ready for this. Spiritual unity. But he's a preacher. He's not supposed to say that. Let me explain. Well, before I explain it, I want to talk about an aside here, because having actual spiritual unity in the context of a marriage is incredible, and while I was studying for this lesson, like a thought occurred to me that I never thought of before, but it makes sense, right? We've already talked about the fact that God, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, they are a being of unity, of harmony, right? And if we believe that when you get baptized, you have that Spirit living inside of you, imagine that between two individuals who are vastly different from each other, and yet they have that Spirit living within them that wants nothing more than to be unified. You want to talk about the advantages of having a Christian, godly, Bible-based marriage. What could be said more than that? That God's Spirit wants there to be unity in the marriage. I just thought of that and I was like, okay, I have to say that. But now, how does spiritual unity, how can that be counterfeit love? There are those who have married for the sole purpose of marrying a Christian. Has that ever backfired? Yep. I was just so attracted to his spirituality. That's what they say. In almost every situation that I have heard of this going wrong, the men were drawn by the way the women looked up to them as a theological mentor. And when the women demonstrate the fact that they are, in fact, a sinner, and at times not always willing students, the men showed that they loved being in a position of authority more than they loved the actual woman. So I know we teach our kids, like, you need to find a nice Christian man or woman to marry, because like what we just talked about, like the benefits of that is like it's so great of being on the same page, and iron sharpening iron, and both of you on the same goal of trying to get closer to God as you get closer to each other, right? You got the triangle thing and all your premarital counseling classes. That's the great benefit of that. But to say that you need to marry a Christian above all other things could be counterfeit love. Saying, well, I have to marry this person, or I have to love this person because, well, they were the opposite gender than I, and they were a Christian, and so therefore, that's what I have to do. Where there might not be any physical attraction, emotional connectedness, none of it. This was kind of a bummer of a class, and I'm sorry for that. But next week, come back next week, because we're going to talk about the positive side of love, because there is a positive side of love after all. Love is good. Love is a good thing to have in your marriage, but it's important for us to know that there on our journeys and commitments to and trying to examine if we have true and lasting love in our marriages, to realize that we can deceive ourselves first and foremost into thinking that we have a relationship built on love when we might not. So, come back next week and we're going to talk about the positive aspects of love. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time in this class. God, it is difficult to talk about the fact that some of our marriages might have a lack of love in them. God, help us to not be so proud or puffed up to think that perhaps our marriage could need some work. Help us to see the cracks and to see the areas that we need to be better at. God, thank you for the gift of marriage, and thank you for your Spirit living in us that draws us closer to unity with our spouses. God, help us to be the kind of husbands and wives that we need to be. And help it to be a demonstration of the perfect marriage between your church and your son. God, please help us as we enter into this time of worship. Help us to worship you free of distraction. Help us to give you all of our heart. It's in your son's name that I pray. Amen.